All right, welcome back everyone to Record Stacks Week 2. I'm Steve, your host, and I'm here with Rob,
What up?
Tim,
Hello.
and Joe.
What's up, guys?
So this week's list is consists of Supermodel by Foster the People, Blink 182's Neighborhoods, The Velvet Underground and Nico, and why am I drawing a blank?
Ram.
Ram. That's it. Random Access Memories. I'm sorry. There you go. So what do you guys want to start with?
I feel like maybe we should start with the Velvet Underground because Ram and Neighborhoods and Supermodel came out around the same time. Like
Fair
ish.
enough.
They
Not even
came out
just
within a
that.
5-year period.
Yeah. And
I
like
think
that's
even
definitely
closer.
the most
3
different
years.
one, I think, out of the three records, you know?
Okay, that's fair. I mean that was my pick, so I guess I'll give you some background. The Velvet Underground were a New York City based, I guess, well, they're not, I guess, but a rock band. They were managed by Andy Warhol, became very involved in the New York underground scene. This album is the one that people have probably all seen with the banana on the cover, done by Andy Warhol. It's my pick, so obviously I'm a big fan. But what do you guys think of it?
Uh
I was
sorry,
sorry.
you go ahead, Joe.
Um, but I was a little bit more shocked. I was very unfamiliar with the Velvet Underground, and two things I found out a little bit shocking is I thought that they were definitely a little bit later in time, and I thought originally before taking a listen to them that their sound was the best way to put it closer to probably the MC5. So I was a little shocked listening to them at first, but very, very happy once I actually did listen to them. I thought, a lot. I don't know who the lead singer is, but I thought, for the time, he sounded something, like some of the, great people in rock and roll and early rock and roll even. To me, a lot of the music, a lot of how they just tried incorporating different sounds was, I don't want to compare them to other bands, but it sounded like you could tell that they were from a melting pot where they had a lot of cultural influences other than, one or two bands, I guess you would say.
That's a good point. The Lou Reed was their lead singer. Lou Reed famously went on to be, rock and roll's resident, degenerate throughout the 70s and 80s. That reputation is really staked here with tales of kinky sex, lots of heroin, and lots of weird people and situations that really are unique to New York City, and especially New York City of a bygone era. Um, Specifically says, Rob, I know you picked out the song "I'm Waiting for the Man" for the weekly playlist. Um, so why don't you tell me what you thought about that? Why you liked that song so much? I guess.
You know, I thought it was just an interesting way to express what is pretty obvious and fairly open about the song is it's about a drug deal, right? Like the exchange and then subsequent use of said drugs. Um, I just thought it was a really interesting way to talk about it. The drug dealer being this shady man in black, dressed in all black, and somebody asks him, it's again very evident in the song that Louis goes to a part of town where there's not that many folks that look like him. Um, he gets called out, and they're saying, what are you doing here?
And chasing all the
Um,
women around.
right, and so it's obvious that Lou Reed's going to a shady part of town. He's gonna make a drug deal. Somebody asks him what he's looking for, and it's interesting that he calls the dealer a dear friend of his. Which on one hand could just be his way of trying to get whoever's asking that question off his back. On the other hand, it's interesting that he adds that little caveat of dear. He could have just said, "Oh, I'm waiting for a friend of mine." It's a dear friend of his, which I think lays itself into the character that Lou Reed is portraying here being very dependent on the substance in which he uses. And then
So do you
later on, I
think?
thought it was interesting. He's talking to a presumed lover, girlfriend in the song, and he gives like that age-old line when she's like asking questions, like he's like, "I'm gonna work it out," that kind of excuse that you get a lot of times. I just thought it was a really like just brutally honest portrayal of getting drugs in presumably New York City at this point.
Yeah. So I got a question for you. Do you think his dear friend is the dealer itself, or do you think he's maybe referring to like the actual heroin he's looking to score off this guy? You know, because the song really is about a junkie, like you said, going up to the Upper West Side trying to score some heroin and go home. So
You know,
I mean, it's open
honestly,
for interpretation, but I'm just curious how you saw it.
I kind of take it as it's one and the same. You know, like I don't know how these people really necessarily view, you know, their suppliers. I don't know how people view their drug dealers, but I think to them it's probably just one and the same. You know, both the drug and their dealer are a friend because they're both the means to the end that is the eventual high. You know, I think that at some point when you're so deep into this addiction, it kind of just becomes one situation. You know.
That's fair. Joe, what's or Tim, what's song stuck out to you on the project?
I personally loved Femme Fatale.
Yeah, what
Yeah,
Nico's sweet little crooning and
I love female vocalists. They're gems. My favorite things, honestly. So
I
her singing in general was awesome to me, and then this song is just absolutely killer, bro. Just look into her false colored eyes. She'll build you up just to put you down. What a clown,
yeah, man,
bro! Come on.
Lou had such a way with words, and I don't think it would have worked if Lou Reed had sang that song, right? Because it would have came
I
across
don't
as
think
jaded. I
No.
mean, it would have been jaded, right? He would have been talking about like some woman that crossed him in some way, but as like, it almost feels like Nico is singing about herself. You know, she's like describing herself to somebody, trying to like lure them in, and I
I
think
also just think that like not to be mean to Lou Reed, but his sing talk, you know, kind of vocals, I don't think would necessarily come off as sensual as the female vocals did. You know,
I
I mean,
mean,
definitely not.
no, but there is a tender side to Lou, but
Oh yeah, you
it,
could definitely have like a sensual, like musky voice, but like
not for this
this song
song.
No,
with like about a female wouldn't really, like
not
especially
even just that. Her name alone, just with the title of the song, is just so much more fitting. If you would have heard, you know, the name of that song, and then you saw the name, and then you heard Lou Reed's voice over hers, it would just be, to me, even off-putting.
That's fair. Um, see. So, what do you guys think of the more challenging moments on the record, like the second side? Because the first side's pretty straightforward, from Sunday Morning to I'm Waiting for the Man and Femme Fatale and all that stuff. The most outlandish song really out there is Venus and Furs, and that's just because of the viola and the content more than really anything else. But the second half is really where I think Lou and the band run wild with songs like European Sun and the Black Angels Death Song, in particular.
I love the guitar riffs on European Sun.
Yeah, and like the banging away at the piano the whole time.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that there's that I think it's in European Sun. There's that sound in it where like they knock over all the plates and break them. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's this awful like loud cacophonous sound that kind of comes out of nowhere and then disappears.
Yeah.
I think I thought it was just so interesting that like they added it as a compositional element to the song, and it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't add anything. It doesn't take anything away. But like, I think if it wasn't there, I don't know if the song would be as enjoyable. Cause like,
The
for what it's
chaos is
worth,
cool.
too, like the song is long. I'm pretty sure it's like 4.5, 5 minutes long, and it's like the same riff being played over and over again. And I feel like when that noise, for whatever reason, is almost like like a trigger to kick you back in to start listening again. Like right when you start getting comfortable with everything, they like hit you with it, and you're like, oh, geez, okay, what the hell was that?
Well, I feel like they also did a very good point on that on There She Goes Again, to a point in when they, I don't remember exactly if you would call it the choir, but they definitely had at least multiple people singing at one point right after Lou was singing. To the point when I didn't expect that to come in at all, where I was listening to it with headphones, and I actually got scared to the point when I took my headphones off real quick and looked over my shoulder because I thought somebody was trying to talk to me. And it's funny because it was just so, I don't want to say abrupt, but something you just didn't expect. And, you know, you could tell, I don't want to say experimental, but definitely something that was different of, you know, I guess you would say music of this genre and generation. That when I was thinking about it again, and I'm literally staring at my phone, screenshotting the song to make sure that I can bring it up. It happened again, and I got just as scared the second time within 30 seconds.
I mean, that's
So I feel like they definitely do a good point of just, bringing different noise in out of the blue, out of nowhere.
so. I think that's a good point, honestly, and I think a really good example of that is "All Tomorrow's Parties" closes the first side. Probably my favorite song on the album, just because there's something so haunting about the combination of Nico's vocals and like that. I guess like the backing track building, it has a lot of tension in it, like that like barroom piano that kind of sounds like it's being played by like a deranged like Jerry Lee Lewis, you know? And it's just Nico in like her flat like atonal singing, just musing about this girl who I guess was a socialite or somebody of like higher status who's now fallen from favor, a lot in the same way Bob Dylan talked about a similar type of character on oh my god, wow, now I can't think of it, whatever, oh, like a Rolling Stone. It's a similar type of character, I think, but uh I think Lou's lyrics are a little more sympathetic to this character than maybe Bob Dylan's were. I know we're not talking about Bob Dylan, but I think Lou was a little more sympathetic to like the feeling of alienation that this person had, and I thought the track did a really good job of creating that just by, placing Nico so like in front of the mix, and so like flat, I guess. You know.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I know that these are on two different sides of the record, but I thought one of the more interesting moments was going from All Tomorrow's Parties, which to be completely honest with you, I kind of found myself zoning in and out of during that song. Um, I think, because of, like the rhythmic, like almost tribal, like drum pattern in the background, and like you said, Nico's like very flat vocals. Um, I found myself going in and out, and then you get to the next song, which was Heroin, um, and like just how jarringly different that song is, even within this very short runtime of that song, relatively. You go from like super slow to super fast and like quiet and loud, and I imagine it's supposed to be like analogous to the feeling of drug use, that
Yeah.
going up and riding the wave and all that.
Well,
But
it's the point where he reaches what does it say, when I put the dropper into my vein, and then it just kind of gets really loud and discordant after that and like falls apart almost. I think that's supposed to simulate like the wave, like the rock, like the high that like hits you over the head.
I just thought it was
And
interesting,
I think And I think, Rob, you put out a very good point without even realizing. But like with all tomorrow's parties, you do kind of feel like you're going in and out of it. And I feel like, that's one of the only few moments in the album that, you kind of feel like it's, I don't want to say being long drawn out, but but he wraps that feeling up very quickly, because as soon as you get to the song Heroin, you're back into it again. You're not, sitting there for 3, 4 songs in a row with that feeling, which is a very, a good thing from an album for an album.
So, what did you guys think of the flow of the album in particular, like from start to finish? Did you feel like there were moments where it dragged? I mean, obviously, we just talked about like All Tomorrow's Parties being a moment, but like overall, outside of like, did you feel like it was cohesive as a piece? Was it like schizophrenic, like it didn't know what it wanted to be? Or do you think like this was a band that had an idea for a sound, and despite all the rough edges, they kind of approximated what they really wanted to do? Like, how does it feel to you
uh,
guys?
you know, I think the concept, if there's definitely changes in tempos and stuff. Like I kind of found myself almost being lulled a little bit during both Femme Fatale and Venus and Furs, which are two more like plodding and slower songs. Um, but I think if you really look at it, the concept of the record as, and this is the way that I kind of looked at it, was like a weekend in New York City, where you have all these different moments, the city that never sleeps, right? You got Sunday morning, which is like soft and twinkling, and then waiting for the man, right? You getting some debauchery with Femme Fatale and Venus and Furs, like if you kind of look at it like that, I think that this paints a very vivid picture of what it would really be like to have a weekend in New York City. So I think the concept is good, but I do think that there are some moments like for me in particular, like between Femme Fatale and Venus and Furs, both of which I didn't really care for, that I was kind of like disconnecting from the record a little bit before Run 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 kind of brings you back up to speed a little bit, you know?
So, for the context on that, right? John Cale, the viola player slash bass player in the band, had worked with a producer, or not a producer, but a composer up to this point, by the name of Lamont Young, and his Theater of Eternal Music. And Lamont Young's whole thing was like one note droning, so like drone type things, right? And that was very popular among like John Cage and like the New York downtown art scene, I guess. And they kind of got wrapped into it. So I think these are their experiments in like the vein of John Cage, or like in the vein of Lamont Young and the Theater of Eternal Music. And like you said, it's completely up to like your taste whether or not they land or not. For me personally, I thought they were really interesting. But I think, I mean, to me personally, I think this project is a conceptual success, because even for somebody like who doesn't understand New York, right? You still understand like what he's explaining. You get like the story and the context and the subtext of all of it without having to be from New York. But being from New York, it makes more sense, like all the more sense. You know what I mean? Like these songs are living, breathing testaments to what the downtown scene was at the time Lou wrote it. And I think there's something to be said for that. In terms of the songwriting, especially the era, it was very honest and very like, I guess, dirty. Really, like I said, like Venus and Furs is all about BDSM and, you know, kissing the boot of shiny, shiny leather. You know, like.
Yeah, I mean, the record's definitely like, you could call it grimy if you want to, but I think it's more fair to the record to just call it honest. Like it doesn't sugarcoat it, you know.
I think it's a product of. I think back to what Joe said. I think it's a product of the time. It has that real '60s sound with it. Those like early evolutions of like those bluegrass guitars and like those chords. But then you see like on European Sun, you see like those harder riffs that like, I was talking about, like those rivets, and then the key, like you start to hear more of that introduction of like attacking the keyboard instead of letting the keyboard play.
I feel like they did a very good job of mixing a lot of different sounds. And, at points, I almost felt like, it almost sounded like to me like almost like something like the Rolling Stones would do. How they just have so many you know, mixing in piano and, like Tim said, the chords. And even what song was it, Steve, that you said that they were using Smashing Plates as a song? Was it Venus and Furs?
Oh, it was My European Sun.
European song, sorry. But it's just, overall, they just did a very, very good job mixing it all together. And you could tell that not only that they were, doing a good job, that I felt like that you could tell that they were from a major city, I don't want to say a port city, but, a city that was culturally influenced and, that they grew up with that type idea.
Right. So, what would you guys, I guess, what are your final thoughts on this record? Like, what do you guys think? Would you recommend it? Do you have some choice cuts? Is it a pass for you guys? How you feeling on this one?
I think that it's a choice cuts for me, because my personal opinion with records from this time period and like my personal outlook on them is that they weren't necessarily meant to be like necessarily I feel like a lot of albums now and later on especially were more movie-esque and were more like an experience as a whole, whereas albums from this time period weren't exactly that. So I give it a choice cuts.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that, as like you said, the era. I mean, it predates Sergeant Pepper, so it's not part of like the album
Yeah.
era in rock yet. Like people were still a
And
very
like
singles driven market.
and I think Barry White was the first guy to do it in the 60s, the interludes. So like interludes as a whole in songs were only just starting. So like there was a lot of experimentation in music that wasn't exactly I don't want to say readily available, but like the the information wasn't present.
Well, yeah, you had a bunch of people trying to figure out what they were doing, pretty much independent of one another.
And like the ability to obtain music and to like learn, I guess, wasn't there, or to grow ideas from, because you had obviously limited resources. You had literal albums,
Yeah,
not even CDs. So
well, that's fair.
Not even
Uh,
just that, they had, still disc jockeys and, radio shows and everything like that. And, you know, still radio hits, had a lot to do with marketing and backing. And I have a feeling that this band, even though Andy Warhol was their manager, I don't think they had a lot of financial backing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. But
Well, financial backing is one thing, but like the backing of like the industry. I mean, this thing charted on Billboard. I think it charted at 175th was its highest peak position before they pulled it off the shelf and had to reprint its cover, and then it killed all of its commercial momentum.
why? Because they got in trouble for using that picture?
The back cover is had a picture of them playing live with one of the Andy Warhol shows, and the guy whose picture was projected on the screen sued them because he wanted money, so they had to pull it and then
Really?
yeah. But what'd you think of it, Joe? What would you give it?
I'd give it a very strong choice cut. I very much enjoyed a lot of it, even on some of the songs like Venus Furs and Verse. I liked, even though, I feel like some people didn't like it strongly. Even Run 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 I thought was a great song. I enjoyed European Sun, as different as it was. But definitely I'd give it a strong choice cut.
That's fair. What about you, Rob? Where are you sitting with this one?
again, not to kind of beat the dead horse, but I'm also my rating was also choice cuts, if only just because, like I said, some parts of the album kind of lost me a little bit, like the slower, more plotting songs. And I don't have anything against slow songs either, because I love a good slow song. I love a good, you know, piece. If it doesn't always have to be like an up tempo in your face piece, but like the two like Femme Fatale and Venus and Furs and um uh I I liked the experimentation on European Sun, but I guess I'm the odd one out in that I didn't really super thoroughly enjoy the track. But I mean, other pieces like Heroin, I thought was a fantastic conceptual piece of what it's like to be under the influence of said substance. And I'm Waiting for the Man was just a really honest look at what it's like to be in that situation. So I'd say conceptually it was a success. Execution wise, some of the slower songs lost me a little bit, but then again, there's enough on this record that I could give it a strong choice cuts rating as well.
That's fair. I'm gonna be the only odd man out. I'm gonna give it the essential tag just because, again, my pick. I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite records. I say it's essential just because, in the context of music, the things that came after it that were so heavily influenced by both Lou Reed himself and the Velvet Underground as an act. There's a famous quote about this thing that says it only sold 40,000 copies, but everybody that bought a copy went out and started a band. Um, so just in that historical aspect, I'd have to give it an essential. And even just like from a musical standpoint, I really enjoy it. I think everybody should at least give it a chance. I think it's worth a listen. I think it rewards multiple listens personally, because I think you glean more from it the more you listen to it, the more you pick away at like Lou's songwriting and things like that. Again, heavily biased was my pick, but I'd give it an essential. Like I said, if you are at all curious about it, I say give it a shot. It's interesting to say the least. So what do you guys want to move on to next? You want to do Random Access Memories, since that's a little different from the other two because it's more electronic, or do you want to move into the Foss of the People record, or what do you want to do?
Um, I mean, I guess we could end with the two that are the most similar, even though they're still very different records. But I mean, we could go on to Random Access Memories because it is kind of the oddball there in that it is a Daft Punk record after all.
Yeah, true. Okay, so This was your pick, Rob. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it? Why you like it so much? Why you picked it?
So um, as everybody knows at this point, Daft Punk broke up very recently. They announced their retirement. It's not very clear whether they're going to continue making music separate or not, but they retired the project of Daft Punk after I think 28 years or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And I picked Random Access Memories because I was considering going with Discovery, which I think is the magnum opus of Daft Punk, but I feel like that's been talked about just so much because of how influential it really was. Both the record and then obviously pairing the record with Interstellar 5555. So I went with Random Access Memories, the last album Daft Punk ever put out, which actually I had never actually listened to all the way through myself. So this was, a new experience for myself. And I mean, I don't know what you can say about the album other than it's just an epic work of art. Between songs like, you have your classic like Daft Punk like grooving songs like Lose Yourself to Dance and Get Lucky, both of those featuring Pharrell, and then Doing It Right, another classic repetitive Daft Punk song. But then you had these absolute like epic works of art like Giorgio and Touch, and especially Contact to end off the record. That I read a story that Daft Punk in their album, in their studio, put a picture of Earth on the wall, and they said, "This is the record we want to make. We want to use this as our influence." And there's a lot of different themes in here between exploring like what it's like to be a human with songs like Within or Fragments of Time, to songs about love, the game of love, and then other things like that. So I mean,
So
obviously, I just can't get enough of the record. Just
I got a
amazing.
question for you. Did you know who Giorgio Moroder was prior to hearing the song Giorgio? Like, did you know anything about him, who he was, anything?
No, and I think that's really cool the way they did that whole song, because not only does it start out with the interview with him, but towards the end, he cuts back in and says something along the lines of, "You have to let go of your concept of what's right about music," and then Daft Punk just goes buck wild and starts throwing like the kitchen sink at the song, as if to say, "All right, you know what, Giorgio, you're right. We don't care what's right about music. We're just gonna do what we want." But to answer your question, no, I had no clue, honestly.
Okay, well, I just was asking because I was curious because it's impressive that they still managed to get like their point across with the song Giorgio, right? Like, so for anyone who isn't sure, Giorgio Moroder is a music producer, worked in Musicland out of Munich. He's famous for engineering and producing all the hits of Donna Summer in the late '70s, some of the biggest disco hits of all time. Um, and obviously a huge influence on Daft Punk and pretty much anybody who made dance music following him. Uh, but evidently enough, which without any of that context, they still managed to explain the story of, even if you don't know who Giorgio Moroder is, it's still just a good story of a guy who worked really hard until one day he just decided to make music for himself. And I really think Giorgio specifically is such a triumph of a track because it explores the entire history of electronic music, starting with what Giorgio says, the click track, and that's all he knew about synthesizers, was it needed a click track, to, like you said, when Daft Punk just goes absolutely buck wild with it in the second half, and essentially you're just making a song that they would make normally, but in, I guess, the image of Giorgio Moroder, like in some sort of weird, like, homage to him, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the more interesting songs, especially because they cut in so much at the end. There's a really hard driving beat in the background that I love, um, and the song is long, but it deserves to be long just because of how evocative it is. And I mean, come on, like at the end of the track, they even have like the old school disc jockey like record scratching going on. Like, you can't tell me that. I certainly didn't expect something like that on a Daft Punk record. Like
No,
it,
not at all.
it really just is like, if you only listen to the three songs I would consider, epics in the traditional sense, like the work of art epics would be the Giorgio, Touch, and Contact. And Giorgio, I think, introduces you to that 7-minute type song that they wanted to make on this record in a fantastic way.
So let's talk about some of those other epics, right? Let's talk about Touch, I guess, then. Uh, Do you think the placement on the record is intentional? Like, do you think it adds anything to it? I mean, it comes right smack dab in the middle of this thing. Like, they threw Touch in between of two Pharrell features. Like, they buried
Can
it in.
I ask a
Yeah, go ahead.
quick question, actually? Who is Paul Williams, and is he related to Pharrell Williams?
No, Paul Williams is an actor, or there's a movie called The Phantom of the Paradise, which is what Touch is like an homage to. It's this weird science fiction movie from the late 70s with like this crazy disco soundtrack and stuff. And
Paul Williams is a composer.
yeah, and I think he did the soundtrack for the original Phantom of the Paradise. So they were hugely inspired by it, both conceptually, the idea of like the mysterious like masked figures, and that's where Daft Punk got the idea of wearing,
He did the Batman animated series of Sky Speed.
that's pretty sick. So I think they just brought him in to like bring the whole thematic homage together, like to really sell that like it was something inspired they were inspired by. That being said, I don't know if I think Paul Williams is just the voice that talks at the beginning that keeps saying he just wants Touch. I don't think he actually contributed at all to the composition of the track, but yeah, I don't know. But
I think the placement's definitely interesting because, like you said, it comes right after the Julian Casablancas feature, right after the Lose Yourself to Dance Pharrell feature, right before the second Pharrell feature, which kind of felt like the middle of the album was supposed to be more of like a not so serious, just dance your dance your butt off kind of section of the record, and then they throw this like 8-minute incredible journey into like really what it means to want that touch, that human connection kind of situation. So I mean, it's definitely interesting. I might have moved it one down and put Lose Yourself to Dance and Get Lucky together, because it's like there's not really much going on conceptually on those two,
Do you think that they wanted to use Touch as an interlude and have Get Lucky be the, without having, an A side and B side? But,
I will.
if you get what I mean.
I would
make, like,
imagine they might have taken it as an attempt to clean your palate, right? So they had those two other songs come in, their big dance hit, like dance floor hits, really, and then you're like just left with this thing at the end of the first side. It's like, here you go. So in the physical copy, like I have a physical copy of Ram, right? And it's very strange because like the needle just like obviously the record stops and you have to turn it over, but it's like the second you're sitting there, like turning it over, you're just like, what the hell was that? And then you go back and then you have Get Lucky coming after it. And it's just like a nice palate cleanser, almost as if to like ease like whatever challenging like ideas they had just presented to you. They're almost just like, yeah, we're just gonna keep going, let's party this up, But then
Well, you did say, sorry to interrupt you, but you did say that Paul Williams was a composer. Could that be like his idea and his touch of like the closing of the first act?
I'm gonna be honest with you, I doubt anybody outside of Daft Punk had any input on like the track listing or anything. These guys these are the types of guys that like conceptualize something from start to finish. Like
I found an interesting anecdote about this Paul Williams guy. So, this is a quote from him. Back when I was drinking, I would imagine things that weren't there, and I get frightened. Then I got sober, and 2 robots called me and asked me to make an album. He also
Yeah.
communicated a message from the robots to the audience.
Yeah, when they won the fucking award, right?
Yeah.
Big one out?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was an interesting scene when they went up on stage together, and one of the members of Daft Punk leaned over to him, I guess, to remind him. They probably talked about it beforehand, but like to remind him, like, "Hey, we wanted you to say this on stage." But that was a pretty funny quip, I think.
do you remember when
Wait,
they
what did
laughed
they
Stevie
want to
Wonder on
say?
stage?
They wanted Paul Williams to say a piece about how they were so happy that they were like, "Yeah, this is a momentous moment for us, for Daft Punk, and for everyone that contributed to Random Access Memories." But they were very happy to see the love and the acceptance of the same-sex couples that were promoted during that particular award ceremony. So they were like just giving a message of unity and equality.
Now, I'm very unfamiliar with Daft Punk. As I just know the radio hits and that's about it. But nobody really knows what they look like, or
No,
they're
you can
just
find pictures of them
but it's
from
like
like
a
back in
very
like the 90s.
yeah, but it's not a very common thing that they go out in public now
Well,
without.
now they don't go out in public at all without their masks on. But like
Okay.
back in like
Or
the
if they do,
90s,
we just
well,
don't know it's them.
well, yeah, I mean they're not like going shopping at the supermarket dressed like Daft Punk, but
Yeah.
It
I
was
mean,
kind of like the Kiss thing, you know.
yeah, they
Like
just never went anywhere
it's
without the makeup.
it was
Yeah.
It
it,
also probably makes their life easier.
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
100%.
Oh yeah, definitely does.
I mean, but like in the Homework era, like around the time of their first album, they were going out and doing interviews without masks all the time. Like one
Yeah.
guy's tall with like he looks kind of like Mark Zuckerberg, honestly. He's tall with curly hair, and the other one's like
Oh,
short with long hair.
The fact that Joe asked though if they took their masks off proves though that like
How
people
effective
don't
it
know if
is.
they exist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like if Daft Punk walked into my job tomorrow without the masks on, like I would have no idea who they are.
Yeah, no, none. It's like MF Doom. Like they really sold all the way out and didn't not sold out, but like they sold out to the idea that like they didn't have to be anybody other than Daft Punk, whoever the hell
And they
that
did
is.
it for like 20 years
Mhm.
plus, right? That's kind of incredible.
I'll put it to you this way: nobody knows who they are, and they were so secretive, even in the aftermath of this project, that for 8 years everybody was asking the question, "Is Daft Punk working on something?" And nobody had any idea until Daft Punk decided to tell us that they had broken up. And I'm pretty sure that they said like they'd been thinking about it for a while. So like that just goes to prove like how effective I guess the masks were for them in that case. That they could literally go 8 years without doing anything and have no leak about anything that they're doing. Like nobody knows anything about them. Um, Back to the record though. Did you guys think the production on this thing, like the lush, like very heavy, I get like but heavy-handed production, it was very bright, very shiny, uh, was something that you liked, or did you think that maybe it wasn't, it took away from the album because maybe it was too polished or too shiny, and like you thought it maybe the production was just covering up for some of the lack of depth to some of these tracks?
I don't know if it was covering up for a lack of depth. I think that if anything, like a lack of depth on some of the songs was obvious because it wasn't meant to be deep.
I'd
don't
agree.
I don't think that they made like this. That's actually not even a fair statement to say. Let me rephrase that. Or what I was thinking. I'm not sure that it was. If it didn't have multiple layers of the sound on purpose, then it was most likely done for it not to be like that. And I didn't find myself hating those tracks. I just found myself waiting for the track to end.
Yeah, for me, like Motherboard stands out for that.
That's fair. I mean, I'm not gonna lie either. I mean, there were some moments on this album that I could do without that weren't some of my favorites, but I think by and large this thing is just like a huge success, both like thematically and like conceptually and just artistically. Like this thing really is a monster, you know?
I agree.
I
My
think.
own-
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, you go.
I was just gonna respond to the production thing. I think really the only way you could really argue that the production and how like clean and polished it is a bad thing, is if you're coming into this record hoping for another Homework where it's just like raw and like you could tell that it's very raw, you're not gonna get that because Daft Punk has clearly like honed their skills since then. And even when you hone your skills, you can choose to make a more raw sound, but they didn't on this album. Um, so if you're just looking for like Homework era Daft Punk, you're not really gonna get it from here. But otherwise, I think the production and being as smooth and spacey as it is, just lends itself to the album. Because like I said, that was the whole point. You know, they had the Earth picture. They were like, "This is what we want to make an album about." You know?
So, with that being said, do you think like is this a concept record? Would you say that Random Access Memories is a conceptual record that has an overarching theme, or do you think it's just more of like a song cycle that we're assigning some kind of deeper meaning to? You know what I mean? Do you think they intended to have some sort of concept here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it starts with the first track. Honestly, um, I think "Give Life Back to Music" sets up the rest of this record because I think that's what they were aiming for.
I can't be the only one that saw some irony in the idea of two robots talking about giving life back to music, right? Like they were talking about making music more, and even ironically enough, two robots made an album that they described as organic because they used a lot of
Now,
real instruments.
can I ask a valid question?
I mean, yeah, Joe,
Do
No.
we know for a fact that they're robots, that they're not aliens?
yeah,
Because,
no, they
like,
make a point of calling themselves robots.
okay, because, like, the song Contact to me kind of made it seem like, you
Paul
know,
Williams said two robots called him.
Yeah, no, but see, there's the
true.
thing.
And you just said that.
Contact is a good point. I mean, that is a very overtly spacey song. I mean, you guys talking to Houston, you know.
It feels like you're flying through space. That whole song.
It feels like you go. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but Tim, you remember in Interstellar when they go through the black hole and like everything's like rushing past them?
At the end,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what it feels like. That's what this track like sonically does for me. It makes me feel like I'm like rushing through some sort of
Right
like
before the library.
yeah, like you're just like rushing through some black hole and like everything's just like flying by you at a million miles an hour and then it just ends. It just stops. It's like, oh, okay.
That movie makes a hell of a lot more sense, by the way, once you understand the science of what they're talking about. Just
Oh,
pointing
yeah.
that out. Random anecdote. We can move on.
I think that this is definitely a concept record in terms of you can look at it to me one of two ways, right? You can either look at it as Daft Punk giving life back to music because of the diversity of sounds on this album. You know, you get like your epics, you get your just dance moments, you get your slower songs like Game of Love, or you can look at it really as a tribute to Daft Punk themselves because you get so much of their different styles. You know, you do get your just dance tracks like Daft Punk started as a house band, right? So you get your Lose Yourself to Dance and you get Lucky, and then you get your more, slowed down kind of jazzy inspired songs like Game of Love, and then like on Discovery when they had Something About Us, and then you get your like 8-minute epics along the way. So like if you look at this as like Daft Punk saying this is us, we want to give life back to music, I think you can make a fairly strong argument for it as a concept record.
So,
It certainly has more concept than some of their other stuff, like obviously Homework. But
well, yeah, Homework has no. Yeah, well, Homework was
You
just
see-
described as them making something to dance to.
Yeah, for sure. Or even something like Humans After All. I think this is a stronger concept record than that.
I can't relate to, what you guys are saying about Homework or any of their other albums because I hate saying this. I'm the person that didn't know Kanye West sampled them in Stronger. I thought Kanye West originally did that himself. So I was very unfamiliar with Daft Punk up until, really, Pharrell Williams kind of blew up with them. Not blew up with them, but, those songs blew up, like Lucky. And when that happened, I kind of knew that they were huge. But listening to this, I feel like they're just the overall, like, I guess you would say theme of the piece is just, more of like a dance, but not just dance. I don't want to say typically like disco, but more of like that, like that, mid late 70s, kind of vibe to it. And I feel like that's why, they wanted it to be more polished because, going back to just knowing from what I know is their bigger hits, to me that just sounds like more raw and like of that time period. And going back to what you said about that guy Giorgio, to me it just even makes more sense with that now that I hear that. I mean,
Yeah, I would. So whatever you interpret the concept to be, I guess is up to you. But I guess we all agree it's thematic because to me there's no two like ways about it. It's a concept record like through and through. Like it's just too dense for it not to be. But to me, and I guess to piggyback on what Joe was saying, it really feels like a love letter to California of the late 70s and early 80s that wasn't real, a place where like the sun never set and it was always golden hour somewhere, you know. Just based on the feeling of a lot of these tracks and like how breezy and open they were and how like just there's just something very warm and California about them to me personally. But so I guess we're
real
oh god
Can I just say one more thing?
yeah
Instead of like California, it's like it reminds me of like a mid late 70s, like Miami, like South Beach, like driving down by the beach, you know, just big hair dancing to, music in your car.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
guess
it's the
we can
same
invoke.
idea of
Yeah,
what you're
it
saying.
evokes some sort of like sunny, warm place
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, it
Um,
doesn't necessarily have like a dance hall type,
yeah, no, it's definitely
vibe to
not
it. Like a 3 a.m.,
like club banger. Yeah, no. So I guess I'll start off with what I thought of it as like terms of like my. I gave it a an essential just because I love this fucking record. I've loved it since it came out, and it only gets better the more I listen to it. Um, I mean, 8 years on, and I'm still like blown away by some of the just the artistic, like the bold choices they made in production. I mean, to go from before this, they made the Tron soundtrack, and before that, they had made Human After All, and in between then and this, they'd done nothing. So it's like to go from Human After All, which it makes sense when you hear it because there's more organic instruments on it, but like it still is just so wild that they decided to go in this direction completely, which is like a complete 180 from where they'd been going previously, you know? So I just think this is a record everybody can enjoy, even outside of like the headier moments that you need to be more like engaged with. You could just put this thing on and dance and have a good time. I don't think there's a bad track on it, to be honest. So I'm gonna give it an essential. What are you gonna give it, Rob?
I also gave it an essentials. I mean, I know I gushed about it at the top of the introduction of this record, but I mean, you know, unless you strictly absolutely hate, and even actually no, even if you strictly hate electronically produced music, there's enough organic sound on this record. Like Instant Crush, if you had told me that was a B-side off of a Strokes album, I would 100% believe you.
That song's amazing.
Yeah, and it's like it sounds organic enough that even if you hate electronically produced music outside of the vocal editing on
The
Julian's
vocoder,
voice,
yeah.
you know, I think, listen, there's not a single song on this record I would consider bad. I only have a minor nitpick, and that's I think those two Pharrell songs are kind of just only good. They're not great as opposed to the rest of these songs being fantastic. But
Yeah.
I mean, listen, if I know we don't do numerical ratings, but I mean this is like as close to a perfect album as you can get in my opinion. If you're only ever going to listen to two Daft Punk records, and I implore you to explore their whole category, but if you only ever listen to two, you have to listen to Discovery and this one. So it's absolutely an essential record in my opinion.
What about you, Tim?
I would.
Oh, I was just gonna go down
Joe
the
can go if he
line.
wants.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, Joe.
I know. I was just gonna say I would definitely have to agree with Tim on. I think that those Pharrell songs are great. I would definitely give this an essential album. Since I'm already talking, I'll just might as well go. But and Rob brings up my final point before I guess I let Tim go. Is Rob brings up another point is they do have a lot of organic sound. And to the point of I want to ask you guys, do you guys know who Panda Bear is? I think the name of the song that he's on, doing it
Yeah,
right.
it's doing it right, featuring Panda Bear, yo.
I love that song. It's such an
Do you know?
earworm.
Without looking it up, do you know who Panda Bear is?
Yep.
Not off the top of my head, no.
Because I had no idea who it was, and that's the one time that I heard a feature on the album. I looked it up, and he's actually from the band Animal Collective,
Mm-hmm.
which I've heard a lot of very great things about. I'm not familiar with them, but I've heard a lot of very good
We might have
things
to
about them.
explore some Animal Collective on the show for you.
Yeah, we might.
But yeah. So Tim, what'd you think of it?
I like it. It's a good album, but it's a choice cuts for me. I like more grimy, harder electronic music personally. We grew up in the era of electronic music that like when it really popped off.
So you're a Skrillex fan?
No, I was gonna my favorite electronic artist is actually Cookie Monster. He's a smaller artist that you could go find if you really wanted to. But like I also like a New Order and like just some of the like harder, more aggressive electronic sounds.
That's fair.
But I think that those Pharrell tracks are absolutely essentials. The fact like Pharrell jumping on those tracks and them making like because they're clear Pharrell tracks. You hear those beats, those funky beats sound right like they're coming from Neptune himself. So I love it. It's a like that that funky rhythmic flow like from Neptune to this album really worked out well, and like it worked out perfect. And that Get Lucky major hit that came out was the epitome of a Pharrell track.
I mean, it's really hard to go wrong when you have Nile Rodgers from Chic playing bass, you know, or guitar. Like,
Oh yeah,
they were just missing Bernard Edwards, and they would have had a whole like Chic song probably. It would have been sick. But
Before we move on, I just want to ask Joe one question. Was this the first time you've ever listened to a Daft Punk record all the way through?
This is the first time I've listened to any type of EDM, house, dance music like that all the way through. You know what? That's not true. I'm trying to remember the name of it. There was one Skrillex album.
was it Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites or Bangarang?
No, I don't think it was Bangarang. It was one that had Chance the Rapper on it.
Oh, probably
It
came
had the
out later
alien head on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did come out later on, and that's the reason I listened to it. And I thought that was a good album, but that's going back to like 10th grade. So
Yeah.
and that's the only one I listened to. So I didn't have much opinion on it, but I definitely give this essential because at times, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm like, wow, this, you know, I knew Daft Punk was good, but you know, I thought, you know, they topped it off at like the Pharrell Williams song good, and I do not think, you know, that the Pharrell Williams song was necessarily the best song on the album. I don't think I have a best song. I think I would have to listen to it multiple times to say that. But, you know, I would very much am going to probably have to go back and listen to other albums, and if not this one again.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, if you really want their other, like, magnum opus, do yourself a favor and go on YouTube, and you can find, because like I said, Daft Punk made a movie with Discovery called Interstellar 5555, the story of the stolen star system or something like that. And if you find a playlist that plays out the movie with the songs, because I think that Discovery is a fantastic record outside of the context of the movie, but for your first time listening to it, I would recommend watching it with the movie so you can get the full content of everything. If you like this record, you're gonna love Discovery.
The concept on Discovery is a little looser than the concept on this one, just because like there's
Without the
no
movie
yeah.
backing, yeah, for sure.
Well, when I was listening to it, you know, to me it was like, it sounded like movie score quality. Like you could tell, and you know, I've completely forgot and didn't even realize until today that they did that thing with, you know, the movie Tron. So, you know, I had no idea really that they even had I don't want to say a backing, but, you know, some knowledge with doing movie scores. And now that you're telling me that, but I was just blown away because, you know, their production level is, you know, and when the man Giorgio was talking, at first, you know, I was sitting there and I'm like, you know, from somebody that's no background knowledge of Daft Punk, I'm thinking that Giorgio, you know, based off how he's talking and based how the production sounded, I thought one of the Daft Punk members was Giorgio. Because, you know, after hearing, you know, the man sounded like he knew what he was talking about, and, you know, it kind of fit in play with this album, and I just, you know, definitely something I'm going to bring up to people and tell them to listen to. Definitely something.
I'm gonna send you a DM actually of a link to the full movie if you want to watch it. But that's just an aside. I was just curious because you said this was your first introduction to them. So
yeah, no, like I watched that little.
So that's just a full playlist for you. But
does Discovery have harder, better, faster, stronger?
Yes.
Or no?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've seen. Okay, so I've seen I think like 2 or 3 of the music videos looped together before.
Yeah, the whole
so
thing
I get
is like
idea.
one big movie. So
okay, I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
That's actually dope. Okay, definitely gonna have to watch that.
So, do you guys want to move on to Supermodel next? Just for the hell of it?
Just for the hell of
it. Yeah, because my notes are open to it, so we might as well, right?
Yeah.
All right, so Joe, this is your pick. Let us. So, why'd you pick it? What drew you to this Foster the People record specifically?
I very much enjoy this album a lot. The reason I recommend it is because a lot of times people know Foster the People, sorry, for their first album or just even the song Pumped Up Kicks. And a lot of times their stuff doesn't get, you know, I don't want to say a lot of plays because people just hear, you know, Pumped Up Kicks and that's all they want to hear after you bring up the name of the band. Or really, you know, you just hear their first album or their newest stuff, and that's mainly because their first album they had more freedom, and their newest stuff, they haven't came out with an album yet, but so I've been told. I don't think they have a record label anymore. They're not under contract anymore. But I very much enjoyed this. I listened to this album throughout high school, um, or even towards the end of high school, a little bit afterward. And to me, there's just a lot of really, great songs on it. I do think, obviously it's not some masterpiece of a perfect album, but I think it's something that, gives a lot of people great exposure to. And it's something that, I definitely think people should go out there and listen to.
That's fair. So I had no idea what to expect going into this because I don't know much about Foster the People, to be honest. Like you said, outside of that first record, Torches and Pumped Up Kicks, which I mean, how do you really. The real question is, how do you, like, get out from under the shadow of a song as big as Pumped Up Kicks, right? You're kind of forever stuck in the shadow of, like, that number one hit that you had. But, that being
Also,
said.
I don't know if people knew this about Pumped Up Kicks. It got a lot of everybody says, there's not everybody, but a lot of people say there's no such thing as bad publicity. A lot of states had a huge chunks of like the chorus of that song just bleeped out all over the radio, everything. Like the whole like better run, better run. Like there's been times like I remember going to Pennsylvania as a kid, and a lot of people like there was even like I feel like news articles about that song coming out. So like a lot of people even know Force of the People just for that. Like older people just for that one lyric.
Yeah. So what I was gonna say though is like trying to get out from underneath that shadow was interesting because I think they did take some really bold choices on this record in some spots to try to like really forge a new path forward and go in a new direction with their sound. That being said, I think by and large, like whether from some kind of outside pressure or just pressure among themselves to try to repeat their success, there's a lot of cookie cutter songs on here that I feel like kind of just blend together. I mean, there's a stretch to the middle of this record where like the three songs I really thought were indistinguishable. And I think it was Coming of Age mixed with uh, Nevermind. I really thought like that stretch of the middle of the record really kind of dragged personally, just because there were moments early in the record that I thought were really interesting and really exciting, and moments later in the record that I thought were very exciting, and then everything kind of in between was just like very generic feeling and cookie cutter. Not that it was bad, I just think like in comparison to the other stuff they were doing, it kind of falls flat for me personally. Um, I mean, the song Pseudologia Fantastica, I think is my favorite song on the whole album. It's some weird like acid rock song mixed with like a Kraftwerk electronic beat with like a four on the like it's just this thing is wild and like I
I would
really
agree with you.
I really thought that this really was what they should have pursued more of. Like this direction specifically really could have been more interesting. But I don't like I said I don't know if either it was some outside pressure or pressure from themselves. They kind of just fell flat on it, you know? I don't really think they explored these ideas as thoroughly or as excitingly as they could have. And I really think, like, for me personally, that holds the record back, right? I'm not taking anything away from them from taking risks. I'm actually holding the record back because they didn't take more risk with it. I think this was too safe and too sterile of an offering, really, for me to, I guess, fall in love with. What about you guys? What do you think?
I would have to agree that this is a bit of an eclectic record in that there are a lot of songs that like kind of do sound very similar. They kind of blend together. My God, though, my major issue with this record has to be the length of most of these songs. It's just way too long. Like this is an 11-song album that's over 50 minutes. And outside of the 32-second interlude song, the rest of them are 4 minutes and 24 seconds or longer. And obviously, I don't have an issue with longer songs because I just talked about how awesome the 8-minute songs on Ram were. But I just feel like a lot of these songs, if they were about a minute to a minute and a half shorter, would have fallen more into my wheelhouse. But they kind of towards the end, it was a little bit repetitive. They kind of dragged on a little bit.
They don't justify their track length. They really
Yeah.
don't.
And it's like, listen, these aren't bad songs musically. I enjoyed a lot of the songs. Like The Truth, I thought was a great song. I loved Ask Yourself, or not love, but I liked Ask Yourself. I liked Coming of Age. I just wish that, I think the major issue is that combine long song lengths of 4.5 minutes or longer with very similar sounding sounds, and you get a lot of ear fatigue um, going through this record. So, and like you said, I really do like the risks that they did take on the album, like on Fire Escape, and I understand that the mixing on this record being spacey and echoey is on purpose. Um, Probably again to simulate like being in an empty room. Um, but so I like the thought experiment there, but then the execution is a little bit flawed. I thought it was peaky. I thought the echoes were just annoying. So I like the sense of discovery and the sense of experimentation. I just wish that the songs were a little bit shorter and maybe executed a little bit better.
See, and my other complaint with it really is that, like, the execution on some of these songs is incredible, and on some of these ideas they pull it off without a hitch. You know, like on the opening track,
Ask Yourself.
yeah,
Or no, Are You What You Want to Be?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It has this great feeling. Like the opening of the track feels like you're walking through a long hallway. You know what I mean? Like you're moving towards something, and then when you get there, it pays off. Like that big chorus and that big, celebratory feeling of the whole thing when it finally builds up to that point is very like a huge payoff, and it's fucking awesome. But then you get back to the verse, and it feels like the payoff isn't as good the second time, right? So like the idea was really cool, and they executed it really well on it the first time, but then like the second or third time they try it throughout the record, it doesn't pay off as much, because it's like, all right, you experimented with this one idea, but then you didn't go anywhere else with it. Like you went to this one place with it and then left it there, and you just kept trying to use it over and over again.
One of the other weird things about this album to me was that some of the production seemed to be a little inconsistent. Like Pseudologia Fantastica was produced incredibly well, and that's a song that I really enjoyed. I thought it was a little bit too long, but I really enjoyed the sound. I thought the vocals were great, the guitar was awesome. But then maybe this was I actually can't even say that this is the version I listened to, because I listened to this track on the official YouTube channel of Foster the People on A Beginner's Guide to Destroying the Moon. It feels like there was an incessant buzzing in my ears, and like the falsetto vocals were just mixed way too high. And I had a similar issue on Fire Escape, where the mixing was just really, I know it was intentional, but like it was just really off. Which is like doesn't make any sense, because like songs like Pseudologia and The Truth were mixed great and they were awesome. And then you have these other ones where I'm sitting there like, did this guy try to mix this in like GarageBand? Like...
Well, that's kind of it, right? Like, it's just so strange that like they could pull it off on some other songs, and then on other songs be so woefully inept at the idea. Like, not even inept, but the execution could be so woefully inept almost. Like you
it's
said,
like, it almost feels like they have two different people working on the record,
And
It's almost like every other song's like Rob's right. It's almost like a different band. Like that. And I hate saying that, but there's some songs that I absolutely love, and that will be like, I don't want to say songs that are like in the soundtrack to my life, but just, songs especially for me that bring me to time and place. But there's other songs that just like Fire Escape, songs that just, to me, would skip right past Goats and Trees, the angelic welcome of Mr. Jones. But then again, there's some other songs that I think that are amazing, like the intro, Are You What You Wanted to Be? And it's just funny because, it's almost amazing how, listening back to this, I didn't realize, it's amazing how it really sounds like two different artists, or, like two different composers, or, like, instead of doing an A or a B side, that they just said, you know what, we're just going to make one, and we're just going to mix them together and just go every other song. you know.
See, and like that would have been cool if the quality of the track had all the tracks maybe held up. I mean, it's it's essentially their White Album moment, right? Where they just had all these really wild, disparate ideas that they were like, we're gonna just put it out as one big piece. But where the White Album succeeds in being kind of shoddy and haphazardly thrown together, this has the opposite effect, right? Whereas like what makes the White Album and like all of its really disparate musical ideas really interesting and engaging are kind of lost here on Foster the People because the I they the idea of them as a collective and then playing with the idea of I guess what the band really is by trying on different hats on every song and trying to be different on every song is only cool if you can do it and if you can make it believable. Whereas in this case, I feel like they were trying on hats, and sometimes the hat was too big, sometimes the hat was too small, and they just never got it right. And occasionally, like, got lucky and like they landed with a perfect. The hat was perfect, right? Boom, right on their head, perfect size. Song comes out, unbelievable. But by and large, I think like their scattershot approach to this really didn't help them. And then when they did settle down to try to do the things that they did well, they were felt very bland by comparison. Like some of the slower, more balladery songs with just like an acoustic guitar and the lead singer's falsetto lost me just because it was like, oh my god, it's like it just felt like every indieism that you could throw at me. It was like a nice little like finger picked acoustic guitar with a falsetto and him singing about how sad he is, and it's like okay, but I get this on every other indie record I listen to. Like, why should I be engaged about this one? Why should I care what you're saying? And like, to go beyond that, the lyrical content really didn't engage me in that front either. It wasn't like they weren't. And I'm not saying you have to always be talking about something deep or something all that highbrow, but like to that point, even like just the songs themselves didn't hold up to me because of the way they were, the haphazard production on everything else. The lyrics actually didn't save them either. So it was just like it failed on almost every level in a lot of cases.
Do you know, Joe? You might know the answer to this. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
like the context of the angelic welcome? Is there a reason that it's like just this weird musical interlude of like 30, 40 seconds or so?
With the
Is there like a
choir
context for
thing,
that? Because
Not,
I have no idea.
not that I am aware of.
Maybe they just wanted to throw it on there just as like
Yeah,
if
like,
it lands.
well, not even just that. Going back to like what I said before, it could necessarily be an interlude without it being called an interlude type idea.
Right.
see, but my issue with that is introducing an interlude to an album that already is so incoherent and schizophrenic really doesn't help because it's just now like we have this 30-second song that doesn't function in any way. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't move us anywhere. It doesn't take us from one song to the next because the song it takes us from sounds nothing like it. And the song that it takes us into also sounds nothing like it. So like it's just a very strange to me. Like I said, like it fails in almost every aspect of it being an interlude because like why is it even here? Like it doesn't do anything, you know.
Yeah, and
And I'm not trying to shit on this album
I
and just
don't
like be mean, but it's just like
I don't necessarily know. It was hard for me to glean a concept from the record. I'm not saying there isn't one. It was just difficult for me to kind of start to put the puzzle pieces together because I had such a hard time getting through a lot of the puzzle pieces. Like, I'll be honest with you, I skipped A Beginner's Guide to Destroying the Moon about 2 minutes and 30 seconds in because that fly sound in my ear and the vocals were just made my teeth hurt. So maybe that there is, a concept in that they thought the angelic welcome was going to interlude between, but I didn't glean necessarily a strong cohesion between a lot of the songs, except for In Their Sound. I don't know. Like it was just a very weird moment where I was just sitting there because, full disclosure, I listen to these albums as background music while I'm doing work, and all of a sudden, like this weird angelic choir comes in, and it was pretty neat. I thought it was cool. I liked the choir, but I just didn't understand why I was listening to a choir. And it's like I said, I don't want to say that there's not a concept on here. I can definitely glean a sense of like emptiness from a lot of the early tracks, like "Are You What You Want to Be?" and "Ask Yourself." I actually wrote in my notes that, and even "Coming of Age," that there's like this sense of like hollowness, like as if he's hiding something behind these upbeat, the upbeat music. So maybe that there's something there that's supposed to be like
Well,
a
I
false,
just
like a false appearance, maybe.
I just looked up. Wait, sorry to interrupt. What
No,
you
you're
were
good.
talking about before about just the random noise and everything from the angelic welcome of Mr. Jones, and I just Googled it and tried finding an answer because I felt like there had to be something for that.
Right.
And I just found this article. It might be the first one I clicked on. It's from some website called clashmusic.com, and it asked, "Are you?" And it's interviewing Mark Forster, who is Forster the people. Are there any bands or albums in particular that have influenced Supermodel? And this is apparently his words. My favorite record of the last 18 months is the second record by Unknown Mortal Orchestra. And he says, there's a song that I wrote called Unforeseeable Fate of Mr. Jones. And I ended up taking a piece of that song and putting it on Supermodel, which happens to be the angelic welcome of Mr. Jones.
Okay, see, now that's dumb. And here's,
Huh.
I'll tell you why
No.
that's dumb.
No,
Because no,
I
no, no,
agree
no,
with
no.
Steve.
Like,
I
it's
agree with Steve.
fucking dumb because you wrote a whole fucking song that this is a part of, and instead of giving us the whole context and the whole piece, you're trying to be smart and you're trying to be sly and you're trying to be sneaky and you give us the first 45 seconds of it and nothing else. And it's like, okay, but the album would have been so much better if you either would have gave us the whole tracks. Now there's fuller context for this thing, or if they had maybe framed this whole thing as the angelic welcome of Mr. Jones and Supermodel being the cycle of Mr. Jones himself. But instead, we just get a bunch of decent indie songs, some really above the cut indie songs, and then this thing that functions as an interlude that doesn't do anything. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean, but like that's
I
even
think-
dumber.
I think the issue is that, even Joe himself, who loves this record, without having looked that up, would not have known that. Like, if they would have put, say, the Angelic Welcome as the second song, and then because it's an 11-song album, the 9th song is the rest of that, the rest of the tale of Mr. Jones, then you can interpret the middle 8 songs as, oh, this is the story of Mr. Jones.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, if this album opens with the angelic welcome, Mr. Jones, and then later on in the track listing you have maybe it closes with the unforeseeable fate of Mr. Jones or whatever the track is called, right? Then it's a cycle, it's a song cycle. It's his life and death,
Yeah.
and it's like
and
here
without
it
that,
doesn't do that.
It kind of just feels like, again, even as somebody who loves this record like Joe, for him to not know that clearly means that the intention of the band didn't come across.
Yeah, and I'm the first person to tell you that like the artist's intent doesn't matter. It only matters how it affects you. But when the intent inherently makes the project feel like takes away from or works against the project, I feel like then that's the only time intent matters. And in this case, I can't tell you what their intent was other than to maybe confuse us. Because I really don't know what this track does. I don't know why we're harping on this 40-second interlude so much, but like it really just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, just to have a random 40-second interlude that none of us really even knew what was going on, including the person who has listened to this album presumably multiple times and loves it. For even them not to know, like, it's worth talking about, I think,
So, I think we're all pretty much in agreement that Psychologia Fantastic is one of our favorite tracks, and
I think it's definitely my favorite track on the album, and this album honestly just really reminded me of Fleet Foxes, and it felt like they just fell on their face compared to it.
I love
never heard the Fleet
Scootalogic.
Foxes album. It's from a few years earlier in that time period. I think it's from 2008 is the first one, and the second album that they have comes out in 2011, also, which is 2 years before this one.
Fun fact, Father
think-
John Misty was the drummer of Fleet Foxes for a long time.
Yeah, and I think that they do a lot better job of getting that angelic, misty acoustic sound while trying to be like that mystifying almost.
I really think by and large this is just I think Foster the People bit off more than they could chew, like conceptually and thematically, and like whether through any, like I said, I don't know if there was any sort of pressure from the label to be like, yo, you need another Pumped Up Kicks, because like that's just how the world functions, right? Like you have one huge hit, you need to have another one, otherwise people are gonna forget about you.
I wouldn't doubt that has something to do with it.
And so I mean, there are some interesting moments lyrically where, like Rob says and Joe said, like he's exploring this feeling of like hollowness, like the idea of imposter syndrome, of him being this famous person but not really feeling like that being him, you know. Like, I want to ask yourself, or is this who you want to be? It's like asking himself, like, is this what I wanted? Is this who I wanted to be when I got older? And, you know, so I thought those moments were strong, and there were some really, like, you know, good turns of phrase and some strong lyrical contributions, but, like, overall, conceptually, it just falls apart for me. I don't think it holds up as a 55-minute album or whatever it is. I gave it choice cuts. To be honest, like I gave it choice cuts. There's some songs on here that I really enjoyed. I think you should check out those songs. I don't think anybody, unless you're a big Foster the People fan or like a big indie head, I don't think you really have to sit through all 55 minutes of this to understand what they wanted from this project.
So I just found out that apparently that there's like a Foster the People full version of the Unforeseeable Fate of Mr. Jones.
I would imagine, yeah. It's probably a whole song, and they just took like a piece of it and put it in the album.
Yeah, and it's like a 5-minute song.
No, surprise, surprise.
Everything.
Everything else in this album is anything longer than 4 minutes.
But it's funny because if you listen to their new stuff, I'm gonna look it up right now because I think their new songs are just as long, but it doesn't feel like it, which is crazy.
I mean, like I said, you know, and I guess I'll
Yeah.
wrap up my thoughts on this too. I have nothing against long songs on their face. You know, if you give me a Contact or a Touch or a
When the
you know,
Levee
from this-
Breaks, or like a Cashmere, you know, songs like in epic in length, but
or like a, you know, even from Discovery, like a Too Long, you know, that tells a story. I have absolutely no issue with a song being over the conventional 3 to 3.5 minutes. It just felt like to me, for an 11 song album that's 55 minutes, and I even wrote in my notes, none of these songs justified their length, I don't think. And that was my major gripe, was that I got such serious ear fatigue. I had to listen to this album in parts. I had to give myself a break from hearing the same thing over and over again. That being said, there were only two absolute flunks on the album, I thought, which was A Beginner's Guide, which I totally skipped, and Fire Escape. The rest, you know, I was not really super blown away by any song on this album except for The Truth, which I love that song. I think it's a great song. However, the rest of them kind of fell into a to only just good rating for me. And so my verdict was choice cuts, like Steve. I think Ask Yourself, Coming of Age, and The Truth are definitely worth taking a look at. Otherwise, I would not recommend necessarily listening to this whole thing in one sitting because you're going to get some serious ear fatigue from a lot of the same sounding songs. I applaud Foster the People for their efforts in being experimental. I just don't think it necessarily landed all the time. So choice cuts, there's some good songs. A lot of them you could do without.
what about you, Tim? What do you got for this one?
What's below choice cuts?
Well, it's instant classic / essential, recommend, choice cuts, pass.
What's below pass?
I mean, there's nothing below pass. Passing on it means I just don't listen to it.
That was kind of a hypothetical question, but yeah, no, I'd give it probably just a pass. Like I said, I would rather just listen to Fleet Foxes if I was going for the sound, or other bands that just did it better from that time period. I think that it was a hit and a miss from a band that never lived up to its hype.
Fair. And obviously, Joe, this is your pick. So what would you give it? I would imagine it's somewhere in the recommend category, right?
No, I would give it a choice cuts.
Okay.
Just because, like I said, like there's songs on it that just, to me, there's definitely songs that I think are recommend quality, but the whole project overall, I want to say is a recommend.
All right. Well, I guess that puts
So
a nice
that's
little
fair
bow
enough.
on it, you know? So our
Yeah,
last
that's
record of the
just
week is Blink-182's Neighborhoods. Why don't you, this is Tim's pick if you want to give us a little background on it.
So this album came out in 2011 after 5 years of no Blink 182 existing. In theory, the band kind of broke up in with air quotes because they obviously didn't really break up, but they took a prolonged hiatus, as they put it. And after Travis Barker almost died in a plane crash, the band got back together with as because they realized life was kind of too short, was their theory behind it. And so during the break, Mark and Travis went and played in their band.
Matchbox 20, right?
No, plus 44 at the time.
Oh, okay.
Or I think it's or 44, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And Tom went and played in his band. And so after the 5 years, they came together and they put this together. They put Neighborhoods together with the set of doing one final tour with the album and then the band being done forever. And as far as we can tell, the band is done forever. They've replaced Tom, and
He's out hunting aliens now.
yeah, Mark and Travis are Travis still has solo projects. Mark has his band. They both have their collaborative band, and they just do their solo work mostly now.
well, isn't
But,
Travis dating one of the Kardashians also now?
oh, I don't know. I
don't
can't
know,
keep up
yeah.
with that.
So I'm gonna full disclosure. I was not a fan of this when I heard it the first time, but I'm gonna credit that to just like having a bad taste in my mouth because I listened to this thing again. I gave it a second shot, and like I was actually very impressed. Like I don't know what bug got up my ass the first time I listened to it, but I just couldn't get into it. But this time, like I really enjoyed. Honestly, pretty much this whole thing. I listened to the deluxe version because I didn't realize there was two different versions. So I know the original version is only 10 songs long, and I listened to one that was 14 or 15 songs long. So I'm not really sure where the traditional end is because when I looked, like some of the track listing was rearranged because of the deluxe edition, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, some of these hooks are like just so sugary and such ear candy. Like they just get stuck and they don't go anywhere. And I mean, that's what Blink does best, right? They make great, catchy pop punk songs that just you can't forget. And I mean, this thing does just that. I don't think it's particularly like groundbreaking or anything, but I do think for a band this late into their career, really, in essentially their third act, to offer up something as solid as this is pretty impressive. Because for the most part, when a band gets to this point in their career, nobody cares or they just stop making. They don't make good music, I guess, anymore. Is like the consensus. But I really enjoyed this. I thought this album was fucking sick.
I you know I enjoyed some of the songs a lot on this album. Like one of them, I love the song "Wishing Well" because that to me screams in your face classic Blink 182. Like that song to me is instantly recognizable as a Blink 182 song. Um, Ghost on the Dance Floor is another similar one. But I I had some issues with some of the songs, not necessarily that the music was bad and not necessarily that the vocals were bad or anything, but it just didn't land, I guess. Um, and I don't want to paint like Blink 182 into a corner and into a box, like you can only do this, right? But that being said, their style clearly works better on songs like Wishing Well, that are that classic Blink 182 type song. And I thought it was great that they tried, they didn't go completely out of left field, but that they tried some different things. Some of it just didn't land necessarily for me. Like I thought Natives, the vocals didn't really land all that well. Snake Charmer was sort of a similar situation, but I mean, I loved Wishing Well. I loved Up All Night. I liked Ghost on the Dance Floor. I liked If She Falls. I thought that was a great track. Um, I think overall it's a solid offering. Um, it's just that some of the things that they tried to do didn't, they were a swing and a miss. But I appreciate the fact that they didn't watch the ball go into the catcher's glove. They tried to take a swing at it. So that's my overall thoughts on the record.
Just to chime in quick before you continue, the 4 bonus tracks, by the way, were a Snake Chamber, Hearts All Gone, Fighting the Gravity, and Even If She Falls.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think I also listen to the whatever, because what I do when I do these reviews is I just go on YouTube, type in the album, and then YouTube has this handy new feature that says play full album, and it's the album off of the official website, so I know I'm not getting like some cheap recorded in a shoe like bootleg.
Yeah, no, see, Snake Charmer was
So
probably...
I think I also listened to the deluxe version looking at it now.
You probably did. It's the only version that you can find really now, because like, why would you listen to the non-deluxe version?
Pretty much.
Yeah, why would you have the non-deluxe stuff? It's just the same thing with added.
It's not like the bonus tracks are just all tossed at the end either. Like, they still are mixed. Like, if you notice, they're not Snake Chamber and Hearts All Gone are in the middle of the album.
I really thought Snake Charmer was my favorite song on that album. I really enjoyed that song a lot. I thought the lyrical content of that song also was pretty interesting and pretty daring for Blink-182. I mean, granted, it's, a typical, like, angsty, like, boy chasing girl kind of thing, but, I mean, they allude to Adam and Eve through the whole thing and, like, are tackling it through the lens of original sin, which I thought was kind of weird. I was like, okay. That being said, I thought it was for Blink-182, who's known for like making like fart jokes and like being snotty-nosed punk rockers, like I thought it was a pretty impressive attempt at interpreting like why men like women and why we're destined to be in this chase forever, And to interpret an original sin that way was definitely bold. I mean,
what was really interesting to me is I love the song After Midnight, right? Which is a song about not being really sure if a relationship's going to work, but just giving it a chance anyway, just saying screw it, right? It's really interesting, like Steve was saying, like, the growth of Blink-182 in some of these songs. Like, some of them are just, like, nonsensical Blink-182 songs, right? But it's funny when you think of that, they used to make songs like First Date, which is, like, very on its face, right? Just like, I'm going on a date and I'm nervous. And now they're like, oh, God, I don't know if this romance is going to work out, but like I'm going to throw myself into this like emotional, roller coaster. And it's just kind of funny to see that growth from like nervous first date to like I'm riding this emotional, hell wagon all the way to wherever it goes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I appreciate it.
See,
go ahead.
I would, going into it the first time, I didn't think, that they were going to try anything different. But the second time around, well, not really the second time around, but, after really listening to it and hearing it, I was kind of happy to see that they did try a lot different. I didn't think that they really went over the board where, like we saw with Forced People, where they tried a whole bunch of different things that, didn't work in some place. I think they just hit it like, subtly changed their sound without doing an overhaul where you didn't know who the band was.
They did a really good job of like Tim said, this was like their last hurrah. So they did a good job of being like, hey, we're Blink-182. Here's all the things you like about us, and here's some things out of left field that we kind of wanted to try, and we're gonna give it to you anyway. Thanks.
If you go through and you watch a lot of the interviews about this album, most of the album is created off spur of the moment things. Like Kaleidoscope, the chorus for that song, the stop draining the color out of my sink.
Right.
Mark even said that song was created off of a random bar that he put together. That line had no meaning when he made it. He gave that line meaning through creating the song that he created with it. But that song originally the chorus and the beginning lyric of that song means absolutely nothing in terms of like when he was creating the song, or in terms of when he thought of the idea. And MH418 2011, which is also one of my favorite songs of the album, beside with Kaleidoscope.
Same here.
In this song, they're talking about the Mark also has also been said that he created the song off the when he was sitting in his car one day at a light or at and a helicopter flew over him in front of his car, and he was in the shadow of it, and that's where the chorus of the song, slow down and stop living in the shadow of a helicopter. It's and silence breakdown in LA. The whole position of the song is supposed to be about those people who live in places where helicopters are constantly flying over them, and how you hold on, the worst is yet to come, save your money for hired guns, violence, there's hell to pay. It's
like,
it's about those people living with living in those
like a
dangerous
country,
areas,
right?
no, like it's LA, like in Compton, like in places where there's just helicopters, like Chicago, Detroit, where there's just police helicopters flying over you.
I think they're just like,
Memphis.
it's cool that they're exploring like the idea of suburbia and growing up outside of like the traditional like way that they would have before, right? They like their whole thing is growing up in suburbia and being like from California and like what it was like growing up there. But I think they finally removed themselves from the equation, right? It's not like this is what it was like growing up for us. It's just like this is what growing up in suburbia is like, period. And they're really delving into like not just the pretty parts of it or like the parts that are nostalgic, but like the honest parts of it, the parts that are just like
I feel
aren't
like
as
this was the
pretty.
I feel like this was the first album that didn't come to them naturally. Like I said, the album was, I don't want to say forced, but like they were writing songs. Songs weren't coming to them per se. It's not like they were just going through their life and then their girlfriend broke up with them and they were like, "Fuck it, yo, let's go write a song about this."
They
No,
weren't
they like
catching lightning
grinded
in a
them out.
bottle, yeah.
Exactly. Like they saw a moment, they like the line clicked, almost like a rapper would today, where like you'll hear a rapper say, "Oh, I was just chilling, and then like the beat came on. I thought of the one bar, and then like the rest just hit me, or like I got the hook, and then I just I pieced it all together through the hook."
And I think, I mean, there's something to be said for working in that manner and still manage to come out with something like fairly cohesive from start to finish. I mean, you would imagine if they were working in like such a kind of scattershot way, right? And like you would get an album that didn't flow very well or maybe was a little shoddy in its construction, but I really think this thing is from start to finish pretty solid. Like I don't think there's really any particular like there's no outright moment that sticks out to me that I was like, wow, this is trash. This is just absolutely terrible. I think for the most part, even the moments that like I would skip or are forgettable, like if I had to, I would put up with them. You know, like if I had to listen to this thing from cover to cover again.
I, I also think an interesting point of this album is that there's not one happy-go-lucky song on it, which is an interesting theme for Blink because they usually have. Well, okay, so usually there it's hard to say because the time frame was different and the music at the time was different, but like their albums before all had these at least one peppy kind of song, like the party song on Enema of State, or like on Dude Ranch you have like um maybe Waggy or Apple Shampoo, like just like these more like upbeat, like fast going, like songs that don't have some deeper meaning with it. Even like the songs about like when like Adam's song, even if it's a sad, like even if it's a premisely sad song, has a very like positive meaning in the end, in that it's supposed to be they survived the tour. The whole point of that song is actually the last, like the end of it. And there's not even a song, like there's no song like that where there's just a happy meaning to it in the end or a happy story that it ends with.
Yeah,
It's
no,
all like dark, hard takes on like whatever is going on in like their lives or the world at this point.
yeah,
I think the closest you get to that is probably Wishing Well. That's probably like the closest you get to the just like a nonsense kind of song, but even that, you know, the lyrics on its face, like out of the context of the song, don't really make a whole lot of sense, but you still get something out of it when you listen to it deeper. But I would say like Wishing Well is probably the closest you would get on this album, in my opinion, to like that nonsense. Just hey, Blink 182. You know. That being said, I love the song. My favorite song in the whole album. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I had really mixed feelings about it when I first heard it, and I've grown to really enjoy this record. I've listened to it a couple of times since I listened to it again and started appreciating it. And I don't know, man. Like this thing, it's not, like I said, it's not groundbreaking. It's not earth shattering. It's not like some landmark album, but it's fun and it's a good offering, and like it's a solid pop punk record. So, like, I really have nothing bad to say about it, to be honest. So, I mean, I recommend it. I gave it a recommend. I think like this is something that most people should spend time with, even just fans of guitar music in general. Like, you're probably gonna find something to like out of this. I mean, they do try their hands at some heavier takes of punk music. There's a couple of songs reminiscent of some hardcore punk. There's a little faster, a little more aggressive. There's some lighthearted moments on here, like classic Blink 182. I just think there's something here for everybody, from a hardcore Blink fan to a casual music fan who just wants to have fun. So that's where I leave it. What about you guys? What do you think of it?
I ended up giving this a choice cuts only just because, like I said, some of the things didn't really necessarily land for me. Like, I don't think there's any out and out bad songs on the record. I don't think there's any songs that, like Steve said, that I would skip or that I would ask somebody to skip if they were playing the record front to back. That being said, some songs like Snake Charmer and Heart's All Gone, kind of a little bit of a miss for me. Just the lyrics and the vocal, not necessarily the content, but the performance. Just maybe it's just something with the way the lead singer portrays the lyrics just didn't necessarily land for me. That being said, I freaking love Wishing Well. Ghost on a Dance Floor is an awesome song. I absolutely love Up All Night, or not Up All Night, After Midnight. Um, and even the two ending songs, Love is Dangerous and If She Falls, like if you're in the right mood, probably would evoke a little bit of emotion from you, just being such heavy content. So I gave it choice cuts. I said it's a solid offering, and please, for the love of God, even if you have no interest in Blink 182 at all, just listen to Wishing Well, because I love that song so much.
What about you, Tim? How do you feel about this? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but like, how do you feel about it?
I think it's an essential album, but if but I could see why people would give it choice cuts. A lot of the album isn't that cohesive, like you guys said, in that they didn't even really work on it together through a lot of it. They weren't in the studio together. A lot of the album was just sent through mail and like pieced together. So like parts of incohesion are definitely throughout it, but like I still think it's an essential.
That's fair. What about you, Joe? What do you feel about this record?
I'd give it a choice cut. Sorry, I would give it a choice cuts, just because sorry, lost my voice there for a second. As much as they do try different things and everything, it's just it's a good album, but it's not anything like that spectacular to me. Like, it's great that it's the last hurrah, and I think they did their last hurrah very well, but I just don't think it's anything that amazing. But like you said, Steve, you did really open up the second time around, and it might be something I might have to listen to a second time. But it was not bad by any means. It's not something I would definitely, I don't want to say be embarrassed to listen to or be embarrassed to say that I listened to. But there were some great songs on it, but they were Blink 182 songs with something a little different, but nothing too crazy. I don't know. To me, I just there's other Blink 182 I feel like I would go and recommend first.
Yeah.
Not first, but definitely other songs at least.
I mean, yeah, Enema of the State is probably like like Blink 182's like crowning achievement, but I don't think it's a bad to be, it's like comparing something to like their definitive work, and I don't think there's really Obviously, it doesn't hold up as well, or it's not as strong as an offering like that. But I still don't think there's anything wrong with this record. That being said, I think that does it for this week. Unless you guys have anything you want to add last minute to any of the records that we talked about.
No, I'm good.
Okay. So, yeah, that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be back with 4 more records to talk about and see if we can come to any consensus on those too. So I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.